All right, here's Chapter 10 about Mars, the planet that we probably most frequently visited with our spacecraft, and you put spacecraft in orbit. Of course, we've landed rovers on the surface of Mars. The Curiosity rover, as a matter of fact, is still active as I record this. Of course, Opportunity and Curiosity have since stopped working. All right, so sometimes it's called the red planet. The red, by the way, comes from the iron oxide that is found in the soil on Mars. These are the things that we're going to talk about: the orbital properties, physical properties, the looking at Mars from the Earth, the possibility of water. We certainly know that there was water on Mars a long time ago. Perhaps even life developed on Mars. We don't know that for sure. Mars certainly has an atmosphere. We'll talk about that. It's mostly carbon dioxide. There's actually a lot of wind on Mars. There's big storms. We see like these little twisters, little tiny twisters, and sometimes the whole planet gets covered with dust. In fact, on some of these dust storms, it does have two moons, Phobos and Deimos. And all right, so let's get into this. All right, so the orbital properties. Probably the biggest thing about Mars is that it's of all the planets, it is the most eccentric. Its orbit is the most eccentric. That is, it gets closer to the sun and further from the sun more than other planets. All right, so this is showing. This picture is showing opposition and conjunction. Conjunction is when, from the Earth's vantage point, the Sun and Mars are in the same portion of the sky, not on top of each other necessarily. Opposition is when the Sun and Mars, or really any planet, when the Sun and that planet are 180 degrees apart in the sky. All right, so that is the subject of conjunction and opposition. These are the physical properties of Mars. Notice it's much, much smaller than the Earth. Again, the moons are Phobos and Deimos. They're actually odd-shaped moons. You'll see pictures of them. They're kind of potato-shaped objects. One more than likely is a captured asteroid. There's its mass. Of course, it's much less massive than the Earth. The density is about 4 grams per cubic centimeter. Remember, those are the units that we normally use. But by the way, it's also tilted almost the same amount as the Earth. That's not showing you this here. And also its day, the time it takes to rotate around once, is almost exactly the same as an Earth day. So that's just an interesting coincidence. It does have polar ice caps that you can see, and it's frozen carbon dioxide that is at the north and south poles of Mars. This middle picture is shown in false color. Of course, there's no blue on the surface of Mars. So again, it's a red planet, mostly because of the iron oxide in the soil. All right, so and we can actually see the polar ice caps. During a Martian summer, the polar ice caps get smaller. During a Martian winter, the polar ice caps get larger. So that's and let's see what else. The dust storms, I mentioned those earlier. There are actually pretty high winds that have been measured on Mars. Of course, we've sent spacecraft that landed on Mars, that rove around Mars, and have recorded other things, besides just looking at the rocks. of Mars, and measured the wind speeds and all right. There's actually several features on Mars. There's a lot of volcanoes on Mars, and this feature right here across this nice map of Mars, it's a gigantic valley. It's much bigger than the Grand Canyon, for example. It would actually stretch from New York to Los Angeles. New York City to Los Angeles. It's called Valles Marineris. It's the biggest canyon in the entire solar system. Mars has a couple of things that are the biggest. It also has the biggest volcano called Olympus Mons. We'll see a picture of that shortly. All right. So, and of course, there are craters on the surface of Mars as well as volcanoes. This is, again, showing us in false color the different regions of Mars. There's Valles Marineris. There's where Opportunity landed, and let's see, and there's where Spirit landed, and of course that's where the Curiosity rover is continuing to explore Mars. The Viking landings, there were two of them. They landed in the 1970s. There were other things. There's Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the entire solar system. All the spacecraft that we've sent, we've tried to look for Martian quakes, but there seems to be no tectonic activity whatsoever. So the crust of Mars is pretty much staying put, unlike the Earth. The northern hemisphere has a lot of volcanic activity, not currently, but shows evidence of that there was a lot of volcanic activity. The southern hemisphere is much more heavily cratered. And the highlands, what are called the highlands, have as it says, an average altitude. So some of the different mountains or volcanoes really of about 5 kilometers. All right. Of course, we think that the north, because the southern hemisphere is much more heavily cratered. That tells us that the northern hemisphere is much younger. Right? It's not as heavily cratered. It's much smoother, and so something resurfaced that. Certainly since the planet formed, 4.5 billion years ago. All right. So it was what we think happened. Of course, is that there were lava flows that resurfaced the northern hemisphere of Mars. I guess I kind of already talked about this. Valles Marineris. Anyhow, it's a gigantic valley on the surface of Mars. Again, it's the biggest. I've already mentioned that. There's a nice picture of Olympus Mons. It's incredible. It's an incredibly large mountain. I mean, it would take. I think it's like at least three times the size of Mount Everest. So you can see the caldera is this kind of circular part at the top. Notice that's 80 kilometers in diameter. And there's lots of volcanoes on Mars, and it says here there's 3 of them that are only just slightly smaller than Olympus Mons. This looks like there was once running water on the surface of Mars. They're showing you a nice delta in Louisiana that obviously shows. We know that there was water there, and this thing on the left definitely looks like resembles the running water. Sorry. There are other features that that give evidence that, and this is what we think is in the early history of Mars, that there was, rivers and lakes on the surface of Mars, and yeah. So let's see. Of course, we don't see any like rivers or lakes nowadays. There's actually some evidence that there was some ice that melted, and that we'll see that in one of these slides coming up, in kind of the side of a mountain on Mars. All right, so that again, we think that the northern hemisphere, which is much younger, may have had giant oceans. All right, and yeah, we definitely see sorry, give me a second. All right, sorry. All right, so as it says here, craters that are smaller than 5 kilometers seem to have eroded away. All right, so let's keep moving here. And this is the thing that was actually observed. Here, there's a better picture of it. Right here. So if you look at on the right in the year 2005, these white streaks, and notice they're not there. It's the exact same spot on the surface of Mars. We've actually had several spacecraft that have orbited Mars over a period of years and have been taking rather close-up photographs. And so, a lot of scientists think that this was just something that some ice. It might have been water ice. It might have been frozen carbon dioxide that basically melted in when this picture was taken in 2005. All right. In the southern hemisphere, we think that some of the ice that is observed, or that is underneath the observed frozen carbon dioxide, is actually water ice. There's some evidence of that. Here's a nice famous picture from the 1970s of the Viking landers. Well, there were 2 of them. This is a nice picture of one of them, showing some nice red rocks. And the Viking landers were actually interesting. They had a device that tested the soil for. They were actually looking for living things back in the 1970s, and they tested the soil. Ultimately, the tests proved negative, that there was nothing that those spacecraft could detect. There were nothing living. There was no living stuff. There's the landing site for Opportunity. Of course, now, and very recently in the news, they talked about how Opportunity NASA officially declared Opportunity dead. And they even had like a little service for it. But it was a really good rover. Today, there's the nice picture of the Curiosity rover that is still, it's been on Mars for many, many years now, and it's still in operation. Hopefully, many, many years into the future. Hopefully.